Mansion in the Mist by John Bellairs, Chapter 9. For the next 3 days, the sky over Shadow Lake was gray and gloomy, clouded by day and clouded at night. Emerson and the others felt terribly frustrated, but there wasn't much they could do except wait. Meanwhile, at night, Anthony began to hear and see strange things. Once he awoke from a sound sleep to hear someone whispering outside his door. Rigid with terror, he sat listening. Who was it? What was the whisperer saying? Anthony could almost make it out, but not quite. He didn't dare go near the door, and after a while the whispering died away. On another night he heard something tapping at his window. It couldn't be a branch because there weren't any trees close enough to his window to touch it. Still, the tapping went on, and with a sudden cry of fear, Anthony rushed to the door and flung it open. There was no one there. The next morning Anthony looked exhausted. He had hardly slept a wink after the tapping incident, but when Miss Eels asked him if anything was wrong, he merely shrugged and munched his cornflakes. Miss Eels and Emerson knew Anthony pretty well by this time, and they were sure they would not get anything out of him by pestering him, so they just let the matter drop, and breakfast was eaten in silence. The rest of the morning was spent cleaning up the cottage. Miss Eels and Anthony did the laundry the old-fashioned way, with a tub and washboard and soap flakes. Later, they hung the wash out to dry on a clothesline behind the house, while Emerson refilled the kerosene lamps and polished their nickel-plated reflectors. After lunch, the three of them played badminton until they were tired, and after a brief nap, they went fishing. Emerson steered the boat leisurely around the lake as he pulled at the oars. He wondered if the sky would be clear tonight. In spite of the danger, he was itching to go back because he felt it was important to follow up the clue scratched on the brasher doubloon. Besides, Emerson liked danger. It got the blood pumping in his veins. It made him feel alive, but the gray clouds that were rolling in from the west did not make him feel very hopeful. It looked like another night of overcast sky. When the cottage and its dock came into view, the three vacationers got a surprise. There, pulled up on the shore, was a rowboat with an outboard motor, and sitting on it was an old white-haired man who calmly puffed a corncob pipe and stared at them with a weary smile, as if to say, "At last." He seemed to be about 60 years old, and his chin was covered with 2 days' growth of stubble. He wore a red plaid shirt, gray work pants, muddy combat boots, and a shapeless gray fedora stuck full of fishing flies. "Evening," said the old man as Emerson pulled the rowboat nearer. "Good evening," said Emerson crisply as he drew alongside the old man's boat. "We're the people who are staying in this cottage. Can we help you?" The old man sighed. "Well, maybe you can. The truth is, I left my oars at home, and I just found out that I am out of gasoline. So I'll have to ask you to let me stay here tonight or help me to get home." Emerson smiled. "As it happens, we can do either one. I have some extra gasoline, and I even have a spare set of oars. You're welcome to share our not very special evening meal and sack out in one of the spare rooms till morning, or just go on your way. Whatever you want to do, we'll help you with it." The old man seemed totally overcome by Emerson's offer of hospitality. Tears came to his eyes. Thank you, sir," he said in a voice thick with emotion. I was lucky to run into decent folks like yourself. I will be glad to have dinner with you, and then I'll put some gas in my tank and go on my way. I live on the other side of the lake. It's not so far." The old man pulled his boat up onto the shore, and Emerson hooked his to a post on the dock. Later, in the kitchen, they had a simple meal of baked potatoes, sausage, and tea. As they ate, Emerson seemed to grow very interested in the old man. He looked at his hands a lot, and he also stared at the flies that were stuck in the hat the old man wore as he gobbled down his food. After dinner, Emerson got out a box of cigars and offered the old man one. The man shook his head vigorously and said no. He had decided cigars were bad for him. Emerson lit one and blew clouds of smoke into the air. Then he looked straight at the old man and said in an offhand way, "So, how are the fish biting on the upper lake? I've heard that the muskellunge are biting up there, not to mention the trout. What do you say?" At first the old man looked a bit disconcerted, as if Emerson had asked him a very personal question, but he coughed and smiled and folded his hands on the table. "I would say I've seen better years of fishing," muttered the old man with a scowl. "It's not so good at all." But Emerson would not let the subject drop. "Do you have a lot of trouble getting through the narrow channel that connects us with the upper lake? It's choked with reeds. People say you can't go up there with an outboard motor because the reeds foul the propeller." The old man began to act upset. He got red in the face and glared out the window at the setting sun. I haven't been up there lately," he mumbled. "The upper lake's fished out from what I hear." "Really?" said Emerson smoothly as he poured himself another cup of coffee. "That's not what I heard. The old man said nothing, and Anthony and Miss Eels looked at each other. What kind of game was Emerson playing? Anthony had seen a lot of reeds at the other end of the lake, but Emerson had never mentioned an upper lake until now. Was he kidding the old guy? Or what? After a few more sips of coffee, the old man abruptly shoved his chair back and stood up. Well, I got to go now, he mumbled, and he clumsily held out his hand for Emerson to shake. Emerson smiled blandly and shook the man's hand. I'll get the gas to fill your engine, he said as he shoved his chair back. He got up to go to the back room where the supplies were kept. A few minutes later, Emerson came back with a red can that spouted a long, collapsible nozzle. The old man waved his hand at Anthony and Miss Eels as he stumbled out the door after Emerson. The gas tank got filled, and soon the elderly fisherman was on his way, putt-putting across the darkening rippled waters of Shadow Lake. Emerson stood at the end of the dock and watched him go. Behind him stood Anthony and Miss Eels, who both seemed slightly bewildered. Filthy, rotten fake, said Emerson aloud as soon as the man was out of hearing range. Miss Eels looked at her brother in amazement. Em, what are you driving at? Emerson chuckled grimly. I'll bet you $1,000,000 that old coot isn't what he pretends to be. Want to know why? Miss Eels looked startled. Yes, I would. He seemed all right to me. Emerson folded his arms and looked scornful. Myra, I've done a lot of fly fishing, and I have never seen flies that looked like the ones in the man's hat. And did you get a look at his hands? They're not red and rough the way a fisherman's hands ought to be. But that's not all. As you may have guessed by now, there is no upper lake, none at all. I wanted to see how our elderly friend would react if I mentioned this fictional upper lake, and I got the kind of response that I expected. He's pretending. I don't know who or what that old geezer is, but he sure isn't a fisherman. Anthony felt cold all over. Some very unpleasant thoughts were forming in his mind. So, who do you think he is, Mr. Eels? He asked in a quavering voice. Emerson heaved a deep sigh and dug his hands into his pockets. I don't know, he said in a low voice, but it has occurred to me that someone may have spotted us when we were poking around in the Temple of the Winds. And if that's true, we may be in deep trouble. We may be facing a visitor from that other world, a visitor with vengeance on his mind. Anthony was feeling very uneasy now. You mean those people in black robes found out that we stole the gold coin and they want it back? Emerson sighed and nodded. Something like that could be going on, I'm afraid, and I haven't the faintest idea of how we ought to deal with the problem. Miss Eels looked skeptical. Em, she said slowly, aren't you pushing the panic button a little bit early? I mean, that old guy might just be a harmless eccentric, some slightly unbalanced local character who wants all the tourists to think he's a great fly fisherman or an expert on the local fishing conditions. That would explain the weird flies on his hat and all the nonsense about the upper lake, well, wouldn't it? Emerson said nothing. The clouds in the west parted, and a long ray of reddish light shot out. It hovered over the three figures who stood on the dock, and when it was gone, darkness deepened on the lake. I think we are in big trouble, Emerson intoned in a grave voice. You can explain all you like, but I feel it in my bones. That old man, whoever or whatever he is, will be back. You mark my words, he will. And I'll bet he's after the gold coin. We'll have to hide it somewhere in a place that's safe. Suggestions, anyone? Miss Eels stopped and picked up the flat, smooth stones that Emerson had plucked from the bed of the lake. She tried to make it skip across the water, but as usual, it didn't work for her. The stones sank immediately. I think we should take the coin out to the middle of the lake and pitch it in, she said at last. We've got the information we need from it, so it's useless to us now unless you think you're going to clean up in the rare coin market, Em. Well, I sort of had something like that in mind, Myra, if you must know, he said with a sheepish grin on his face. I mean, even a defaced Brasher doubloon is worth something. You might get $10,000 for it instead of $250,000 that you could expect if it was undamaged. That would be enough money to pay for Anthony's college education. Boy, those were the days. Miss Eels looked at Emerson in exasperation. Em, they don't let dead people into college. What I mean is, if you're right about that old guy, then he'll kill us out of pure spite if he can't find the coin. Is it worth it to hide the thing? Emerson seemed amused. So now you've come around to my point of view about the old geezer, he said, chuckling. Then he turned to Anthony, who had not said much lately. Anthony, Emerson asked, where would you hide the doubloon? Anthony shrugged. Gee, Mr. Eels, there's a loose board in the floor in the parlor. I noticed it because I keep stepping on it. Why don't we put the coin under there? Emerson grinned and rubbed his hands together in a satisfied way. An excellent suggestion, he said. Brilliant. I'll get a claw hammer and draw out the nails in the board. Then we can put the board back when we've hidden the coin. I think the two of you are out of your minds, said Miss Eels as she turned to go back to the cottage. But even lunatics can dry dishes and put them away on shelves. Come on, we've got some cleaning up to do. After the dishes were done, Emerson and Anthony got the loose floorboard up in the study, and they laid the coin down on the dirt under the parlor floor. Then Emerson replaced the board and banged the nails back into place. Later, the three vacationers tried to spend a normal evening in the parlor. Miss Eels and Anthony played gin rummy, and Emerson played Gilbert and Sullivan tunes on the upright piano. It was a warm night, and all the downstairs windows were open. A stiff breeze was blowing, and every time a branch swished against the side of the house or an acorn rolled down the roof, Miss Eels would turn and stare wildly toward the door. Once, when the waves of the lake bumped their rowboat against the dock, Miss Eels made a little nervous cry and ran to the glass-paned door. She flung it open and stepped out onto the porch. Nobody there. "Good heavens, Myra!" exclaimed Emerson, turning around on the piano stool. "You're giving everyone the heebie-jeebies, the way you're acting. Do you really think that old man, or whoever he is, will come barging in here while we're still up? He won't return until he thinks we're asleep." "And do you think any of us is going to sleep a wink tonight?" asked Miss Eels as she walked back into the parlor. "I'm planning on having a nervous breakdown. How about you?" Emerson got up and brushed lint off the sleeves of his shirt. "Well, Myra," he said calmly, "you can do what you like. I am going to sit all night on the front porch with an axe handle in my hands. I think our friends will show up. I think our friend will show up, and I want to be there to greet him." Miss Eels was really beginning to worry about her brother's sanity now. "Emerson," she exclaimed, "if there's someone from that other world coming to get the coin, do you really think you can defend yourself with an axe handle? Use your brain, for heaven's sake." "I am using my brain," snapped Emerson, "and I have a little theory about how much power that old coot might have. But see here, it's almost 11 o'clock. Why don't the two of you go to bed, and I'll stand guard? You're not going to help by pacing back and forth and chewing your lips." Miss Eels stared helplessly at Emerson a few seconds. Then she went around the room and turned off all the oil lamps except one. Meanwhile, Anthony lit a couple of candles so the two of them could find their way up to bed. Emerson went around to the back of the house and opened the rattly door of the tool shed. With a flashlight in hand, he poked around till he found a stout, smooth axe handle. Then he made his way back around to the front of the house again. After putting out the last oil lamp, he went out to the front porch, turned off his flashlight, and sat down to wait. Minutes dragged past, a quarter of an hour, then a half hour went by. The parlor windows were open, so Emerson could hear the ticking of the shelf clock and its loud, hoarse croaking when it struck the half hours and hours. Outside, it was totally dark. Emerson heard the crickets in the tall grass, and now and then he saw a streak of moonlight on the rippled waters of the lake. This light broke through when the clouds parted briefly, but then they would rush in to close up the gap, and the darkness would continue. Humming softly, Emerson gripped the axe handle in his right hand and tapped it calmly on his knee. Midnight passed, and so did 12:30 in the morning. By now, Emerson's eyes had gotten used to the darkness, as he could make out the narrow oblong shape of the dock and their boat, bumping gently against the pilings. Suddenly, Emerson heard the dip and splash of oars. A rowboat was gliding in past the dock to the shore, and Emerson could see a shadowy figure inside it. The bow of the rowboat ground into the soft sand, and a figure leapt out to pull it up farther. Even in the dark, Emerson could tell that the person coming toward him was not the old fisherman. It was someone tall and lean, someone who wore a long cape or robe. Gripping the axe handle tightly, Emerson sat up in his chair. He felt the blood singing in his ears. "Who is it?" he called out. No answer. The figure strode swiftly forward, and soon it was on the path that led to the porch. Crunch, crunch went the gravel as the menacing shape stepped forward. At the foot of the cracked wooden steps, it halted. "I am the Grand Autarch," the deep voice intoned. "I have come to take back the object you stole from my domain. Give it to me." The Grand Autarch. Emerson realized that he must be speaking to the tall, hunched figure with the golden chain around his neck, the one who had been sitting at the head of the table in the council chamber of the mansion. Because he had seen the Autarch only through the peephole in the wall, Emerson had not gotten a really good look at the man. Probably he would get a better look in a minute. "The Grand Autarch," said Emerson, and then he laughed mockingly. "Ha, ha, ha! How about that? Is that anything like a grand dragon? Are you with the Ku Klux Klan or what?" The Grand Autarch seemed disconcerted by this mockery, so he wrapped his cloak about him and spoke again in a menacing voice. Little man, you do not understand your peril. I could shrivel you to a cinder with a single gesture of my hand, but I will be merciful if you give that golden trinket to me now. I don't think I've ever been shriveled to a cinder, said Emerson carefully. It'd be a new experience, but look here. You're trespassing on private property, and you're interfering with the sleep of my household. I don't have anything for you, so I would suggest that you go clear out. Besides, you're beginning to bore me. Go on, scram. Silence. The Autarch said nothing. For a full minute, the two of them faced each other in silence. Then Emerson saw the cape swirl, and he thought he caught a glimmer of a knife blade. Ah! Roared the Autarch. And he rushed up the steps with a wicked-looking dagger held on high. Emerson stepped nimbly to one side and whacked the man on the shoulder with the axe handle. The Autarch groaned with pain and fell to his knees. Then he struggled back to his feet, and Emerson hit him on the other shoulder. Frightened and angry, the Autarch tried once more to stab Emerson with the dagger, but Emerson brought the axe handle down on his wrist, and the dagger clattered to the boards of the porch. This is kind of getting to be fun, panted Emerson as he backed up against the wall of the house and waited for the Autarch's next move. You are better off as an old fisherman, and I would suggest that you turn back into one and scoot, or haven't you had enough? The Autarch rubbed his sore shoulder and stumbled back down the steps to the path. I'll make you wish that you had never been born, little man, he snarled. Being skinned alive would be a picnic compared to what I am going to do to you. Just wait. I can wait, said Emerson placidly. Your threats mean nothing to me, but if you're not out of here in 2 minutes, I'm going to come down there and beat knobs on your head, understand? The Autarch paused a moment more, then turning abruptly, he strode off the path and made his way through the long grass to the place where his boat was pulled up onto the sand. After a little struggling, he shoved the boat out into the lake and climbed in. Once more, Emerson heard the sound of oars splashing as the rowboat disappeared into the blackness. Oh, good Lord, breathed Emerson as he mopped his face with his handkerchief. Mercy upon us all, it worked! Two figures popped up from the place where they had been crouching. Below the parlor windows, Anthony and Miss Eels had not really gone to bed. In stocking feet, they had tiptoed down the back staircase and crept along the hall till they reached the parlor window. From there, they had listened to the strange battle between Emerson and the menacing creature from another world. Miss Eels stumbled out onto the porch with Anthony close behind her. What worked? Miss Eels asked in a bewildered tone. Emerson heaved a deep sigh. After the fight, he seemed weary, but he tried to act as if he were in control of the situation. I guessed that the Autarch would be practically powerless in our world. Otherwise, why would he bother to make himself look like an old fisherman? Anyone who can fry someone's brains with a gesture doesn't need to use trickery to get what he wants, or knives for that matter, so I decided I could push him around. But how come you were so sure? Asked Anthony, who was amazed at Emerson's calmness in the face of danger. Anthony raised the beam of his flashlight and saw that Emerson's face looked drawn and haggard. Beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. Once again, Anthony asked his question. How did you know? Weren't you so afraid? I wasn't sure at all, said Emerson faintly. Not until I tried. And with that, he collapsed in a heap on the splintery boards. And that is the end of chapter 9.